In this video, we're going to show you how to set up the brand new SNO-MASTER drawbar and razor float system. Before we get started, let's talk about the safety equipment and tools needed for this installation. We recommend eye, hand, and knee protection, as well as a Phillips screwdriver, 3/4, 9/16, and 2 1/2 inch either wrenches or sockets. Next, we recommend opening it up and double checking that you have all of the parts and pieces that should be included. We'll take a minute to show a close-up of the different parts and pieces. Once you've laid out and made sure that you have all of the parts and pieces for the assembly, the next thing to do is to double check your bolts that are pre-installed. A couple of these you will need to remove or loosen during the installation, so don't over tighten any of these bolts at this point, but at this point you can make sure that they are snug and not going to fall apart during installation or as you move this system around. One other thing to note, in this video we're not going to talk about the chassis setup, so setting up the wings, the runners, the pan link adjuster, or the wheel kit. All of that is covered in other videos or in the instruction manuals, and you can refer to those, but we will connect the chassis to the drawbars, so make sure that you have your chassis set up before starting this installation. So there are 4 different steps that we're going to walk through in this video. The first is to finish the drawbar razor float system setup. We are going to set up the chassis bar and deflectors. The third step is we will connect those 2 systems together. And then step 4 is to add the razor to the bottom of the float system. In this first step, we're going to attach the lift mount and the lift slide to the razor bar and drawbar system. First, we'll attach the lift slide to the middle of the razor bars using our small clevis and cotter pin. Simply line up the holes and it's ready to go. The next step's a little more tricky, but you just need to line up the lift slide down the middle of the lift mount and then simply bring that in line with your holes on the drawbar itself. You can also simultaneously line up the lift slide here and using your bent clevis and cotter pin, simply put it in the top or most maxed out position as well. And that will keep it in place so it doesn't bounce around while you're attaching the rest of the bolts. Then we're going to grab our 2 3/4 inch bolt and 3/8 inch nuts to attach the rest of the lift mount system. Once we have all the bolts lined up and nuts finger tight, we can go ahead and use our socket or wrench to tighten them the rest of the way. Now that the drawbar is set up and ready to go with the razor float system, we're going to move over to the chassis bar and deflectors. Again, it's important to make sure that you've completely set up your chassis before beginning this step, but we're going to go ahead and start with the chassis bar. Now, there are 2 different sides to the chassis bar. You're going to have one side that already has a mounting plate welded onto the bar, and the other side has 4 holes for attaching the second mounting plate. The second mounting plate should include the 4 screws, locking washers, and the 2 cotter pins. So to get started, we're going to remove one of the cotter pins and simply attach the one side with the mounting plate that's welded to our chassis. Now moving to the other side, again remembering that we have our lifting links already installed, everything else is already there, we're going to line up the mounting plate with the chassis bar onto the chassis pin here. And then by lifting the chassis bar just on top of the lifting link bolts, we can line up these 4 holes. We recommend not tightening these all of the way, so once you've lined those up, you can simply get them started just finger tight, and then grab the next one. Again, remember to have your locking washers on those as well, and we can just slowly tighten these up here. Make sure that all 4 screws are started before you begin tightening these down to the mounting plate and connecting that to your chassis bar. And then once you have all of the screws on, you can then add your cotter pin on this side. Next, we're going to attach the lifting link to the chassis bar. You can lift up on your chassis bar and then move your lifting link into place. Now, this can be adjusted later depending on how the drawbar is attached to your machine to make sure that the bottom of the chassis is level and getting good corduroy out the back. For now, we're just going to pick one of the holes somewhere in the middle, usually around the 3rd or 4th hole, and just line those up so that we can continue the installation and attach the drawbars. Same thing on the other side. Just make sure that you count and use the same hole on both sides so as to not put undue tension or twist on the chassis bar. We're going to attach the 2 deflector mounts to the top of your deflector, making sure that your deflectors are down and your L bracket is coming up. That will help make sure that your orientation is correct. We're going to line up our hex bolts through the holes and then using our 2 1/2-inch wrenches or sockets to tighten these up. And then same thing on the other side. Once we have that in place, we can slide that up, as this is going to be mounted underneath your chassis bar. But we need to attach the drawbars to the chassis bar first and then add the deflector below. Now that we have everything lined up and our last bag of bolts here, this should be our 2-inch bolts, we're going to go ahead and readjust our lifting mount so that we can get a little bit more lift. You can pick a lower hole here to line that up. This will allow us to lift the drawbars and not have to lift the whole Razor system. So we're going to lean the chassis bar away. We're going to pick up the drawbar and then bring them back down into alignment there, just like that. Next, we can go ahead and start inserting our bolts here. And note, this may be one of the steps where you have to loosen a couple of the pre-installed bolts just a little bit to allow some flexibility to add these new bolts that connect the drawbars to the chassis bar. Now, remembering that you need to install the deflectors with these same bolts, only install the nut on the inside bolts. So the 2 inside bolts, we can place the nut on those 2 bolts first, and then bringing the deflectors up, we can add the deflector to the bottom of the chassis bar. Now that we have everything lined up and the nuts finger tight, then we can put a little more pressure and readjust the whole system a little bit. Remember again that you're on a surface that can slide a little bit, especially with these bars, even on like a carpeted surface, or in this case, the cardboard packaging that it came with. Once everything is aligned, then we can go ahead and take our 9/16 socket or wrench and go ahead and tighten these up. So the last step is attaching the razor. Now, again, be careful while handling the razor. It is sharp. It is meant to cut things. So be careful around the groomer itself. Be careful with your own hands and appendages and anything else that's in the area. You want to be careful as you're moving this around. We're going to slide it underneath and attach it to the razor bars. The first step we're going to do is actually raise the razor bars using the lift link system. So we can remove our clevis and cotter pin here and then simply lift up on the razor bar, and this will allow us to put that back into its highest position. So if we do that, it will allow us now to access the bolts and the mounts for the razor. We can kind of line this up and use the equipment to help us align this. We're going to remove the hex nut using our 3/4 inch socket or wrench. If you're installing a 48, there will be 1 or 2 washers for each side. If you're installing a 72, they will not include any washers with this razor system. The next step is we can line up the razor with the razor bars. And then again, removing the cotter pin and clevis pin here, we can go ahead and slowly lower the razor bars onto the razor system. Once you have the razor in place and you slip the bolt through the razor and the washer, again, if it's on the 48, then you can tighten those up with your 3/4 inch wrench. Now that we have the razor on, we can go ahead and start connecting to the machine. Obviously, one last thing you want to do is go around and double check all of your bolts and nuts. Make sure that everything's tightened up. The other thing you'll want to do is make sure that your chassis is level and set your razor to the appropriate angle as well. As far as the connection to your machine, you have several different options, including the different drops or straight, pin coupler, the ring, and then once you've selected and determined the height, you can go ahead and connect everything up. And now you're ready to start grooming. If you have any questions about this groomer setup or any of our groomers, please let us know in the comments, give us a call, email, or visit us online, snowgroomers.net. Thanks, and we'll see you on the trail.